All right, fam. Now for our feature story of the day. Can BitBonds really work? Well, VanEck's proposal for the U.S. to buy Bitcoin and refinance the debt. I want to break this down for you. And also, we have covered this before, the proposal to use $2 trillion, which they can print out of thin air. They could ultimately dump $2 trillion worth of their gold reserves and trade it for the Bitcoin and ultimately acquire 2.22 million BTC. And we already know Michael Saylor proposed for the U.S. and Trump and his administration at the recent crypto White House summit for them to acquire up to 5% of the Bitcoin supply, which is, 25% of the Bitcoin supply, which is 5 million Bitcoin. So I want to break this stuff down, and then I'll give you some insights from the high priest of Bitcoin, Max Keiser, and his two Satoshis regarding this. But let's start here. At the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Summit 2025, held April 15th, 5 days ago, Matthew Sigel, head of the research over at VanEck, one of the largest asset management giants, unveiled a groundbreaking concept that could reshape how the U.S. government approaches its debt. A financial product he calls the BitBonds. This innovative bond would combine traditional U.S. Treasury bonds with a small exposure to Bitcoin, aiming to attract more buyers while lowering the borrowing costs. Now, this idea has been floated around. Under Sigel's proposal, each BitBond would consist of 90% traditional government debt and 10% tied to the BITI value, with approximately $14 trillion in government debt maturing over the coming years. This approach could offer a new avenue for financing. Sigel emphasized the current high interest rates necessitate more attractive options for investors. By incorporating Bitcoin, the government could appeal to buyers looking for a hedge against inflation, according to VanEck's head of research. And even in a scenario where the BITI's value plummets, Sigel argues that BitBonds can still benefit the government. For example, if issued with just a 1 or 2% interest rate, these bonds could remain cheaper than the prevailing market rates, which hover currently at around 4%. So should Bitcoin appreciate and yield returns exceeding 4.5% annually, any additional profits would be shared equally between the bondholders and the government, providing a win-win situation. However, Sigel cautioned that the BITI would need to experience significant growth for the investors to offset the lower returns typically associated with government bonds. So everything is on the table. On the eve of Sigel's proposal, Bo Hines, who leads the Presidential Council of Advisors for Digital Assets at the White House, discussed strategies to enhance the U.S. Bitcoin reserves without relying on taxpayer funds. That's right. If we can have net neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin, they're all for it, as long as it doesn't cost taxpayers money. And there's a lot of significant viable ways we can do that. We can do that by dumping the USA gold reserves. We can do this by printing money out of thin air, or just whatever money is being wasted being sent to Ukraine, just buy some motherfucking Bitcoin. Common sense. And in a recent interview with Pompliano, the CEO of Professional Capital Management, Hines suggested updating the valuation of gold certificates currently held by the Treasury. Couldn't agree more, because that's fake gold. It's just a certificate, a gold note, for lack of a better term. So it's derivatives at the end of the day. So get rid of that shit and hold the apex predator, obviously the hardest asset known to mankind. These certificates of the gold, which are recorded at just 43 an ounce, because they know it's fool's gold, are vastly undervalued compared to the current market price. As we know, we just hit a new gold all-time high of roughly just above 3,300. So adjusting this value could generate a surplus that the government can use to acquire Bitcoin. So many net neutral strategies, fam. It's not even funny. All while keeping its gold reserves intact. And Hines also stressed the importance of exploring all possible options, stating everything is on the table. The goal is to maximize the BITI holdings through responsible and cost-neutral methods. That's the key. We will maximize the BITI holdings, the U.S. says, as long as it's cost neutral. And again, there's plenty of ways to do that, which we just outlined. He also revealed that the initial phase of the government's Bitcoin reserve would derive from digital assets seized in criminal investigations, criminals, drug traffickers, anti-money laundering, tax avoidance. Now, I also wanted to share some of the latest insights from Max, because he's the one who actually proposed the idea, like with the BitBonds and all that. And let's see what he has to say and chime in, and we'll go from there. China, and just some randoms. China takes the lead in the global culture war. Chinese media getting very funny and creative. Eggs in America, eh? That is kind of funny. But anyways, the war in Iraq was not a matter of terrorism, but maintaining control of the world's oil and gold. Saddam made a move. It threatened the U.S. dollar, and they needed to excuse to act. I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, here's the gold reserves right here. They wanted to seize Iraq's gold, so they pretended there was a terrorist attack, which was an insider job. And I got to be careful what I say while I'm on the tube, but I digress. You all know. Kaiser also put budget neutral, such a cowardly Bitcoin policy. Cowboy up before it's too late. I actually like that. We're going to repost that. And in response to the BitBonds, again, shout out Max for reposting my stream. He says they should, but they fear killing the US dollar. So that's why he says the US won't do it. And USD stablecoins provide a false sense of comfort and remove urgency. Stablecoins are a gateway drug to the fiat addiction. So though it is a viable strategy, he don't think it is the most likely scenario, obviously, and he breaks down why that is, because they fear it will kill the US dollar, and their goal is to keep the dollar strong. Now, I also wanted to share something very significant that caught my eyes a little earlier. Check this out. Context alert. Well, actually, it was something else before we get into the Clintons, and we all know they're evil. The Bushes are evil. There was something else here. Let's see here. This was the one. Yeah, this is the one. So I'm going to read you something very significant that Max posted earlier, and I hope you guys can repost it. Max and Stacy faced gang assassination on February 22nd, 2022 on 2/22/22. But we held our ground to fight with Bukele to win El Salvador's liberation from the MS-13. Flash forward to 2025. This motherfucker. Chris Van Hollen sipping Mai Tais with MS-13 killers in the Sheraton, the same place JV just stayed 2 months ago, in El Salvador, on the taxpayer's dime, swapping pupusa recipes. So my first instinct was, what's going on? Lock these mofos up. I mean, who in the right mind would be backing these piece of terrorists, right? But it gets a little deeper. And for those who probably don't know this, check this out. February 3rd, 2022, Max and Stacy first met President Bukele at the groundbreaking BINAES library. The Bukele miracle is happening, but US-based MS-13 gang decided to terrorize the nation with 87 homicides in 72 hours. Two very high-profile, obvious targets, Americans, Max and Stacy, find themselves alone in an abandoned hotel in San Benito, awaiting certain death. We didn't run. We decided to stay and help Bukele fight for El Salvador's liberation in any way possible. I am sickened when I see U.S. politicians coming to El Salvador now for photo ops with MS-13 terrorists to score political points. Where were these grifters during the terrorist occupation? Did they have anything to say during the mass slaughter in March of 2022? Do they even acknowledge that MS-13 were exported to El Salvador from the U.S. by the Clintons? That's right. Do they apologize for the U.S./Soviet proxy war that nearly obliterated the country? Do any of these venal gas bags apologize for that three-letter organization's 1980 assassination on the steps of the cathedral occurred just a few yards from where this video of President Bukele and Max and Stacy were taped? No. They're all a bunch of craven parasites living off the blood and tears of others. Disgusting. And here's the proof of work. I believe this was when Max first met Bukele alongside Stacy, and this was a very pivotal time, clearly, for El Salvador. So thank God they're alive, and thank God Bukele reigned supreme, and they locked up all these terrorists. But I don't understand why they're plotting with these American politicians. Not a good look. But anyways, I digress. There you have it. There's the latest from the high priest himself, Max Kaiser, and regarding the BitBonds and all those kind of things. And welcome everyone joining us. Happy Easter Sunday.